Day. Welcome, welcome. Pleasure to have everybody here. There are many familiar faces that we see from the MEA community. Welcome. And lots of new faces as well. My name is Carrie Henley. I'm happy to be the Zoom MC here for the moment. Before we begin with Chip and Soledad, so happy to have you here. Wave at the Zoom universe that we are all in here. How many of you are here for the very first time? You have never been to a MEA event before. Oh, look at those hands going up. Awesome. So I love to play around with Zoom a little bit for the moment. So go ahead and put it in the gallery view up in the top right-hand corner so you can see each other. Super fun. You can actually high-five each other on the side. You can, say hi to each other. And go ahead and pop into the chat. Where are you in the world right now? We are such an international community. We have folks at MEA from all over the world. I can see Sembe here is one of our alumni from Japan. We have folks from all over Europe, North America, and the APAC region. So really fun to see that in the chat. We will be giving you a chance to ask some questions of Chip and Soledad a little bit later in the hour that we have together today. But if you do have questions, you can put them in the chat at any time. If you have a technical question, you can private chat to me and I'd be happy to help you. And let's get started. So I'm going to bring Chip up into the spotlight, and founder of Modern Elder Academy. And you're in for a treat today. I'm really excited for this conversation. Take it away. Thank you, Chip.
Thank you, Carrie. I love you. Well, it was about 3 years ago, I believe, that I met Soledad in Cincinnati. We were both, if I'm not mistaken, speaking at a Procter & Gamble event, a conference. And I was just struck by how radiant she is. I mean, on screen, she looks sexy and beautiful and ageless, and, you can keep going. But when you meet someone in person, you can sort of feel the energy too. And the energy was really beautiful. And so we had a brief conversation. I told her about MEA. And of course, between then and now, we had COVID, we had pandemic, and a lot's happened since then. But let me do a quick bio of, I'm doing the short version of Soledad's bio, and then we're gonna get into some questions. So Soledad O'Brien, here we go, is an award-winning documentarian, journalist, speaker, author, and philanthropist who founded Soledad O'Brien Productions, SOB, a multi-platform and media production company dedicated to telling empowering and authentic stories on a range of social issues. She anchors and produces the Hearst TV political magazine program, Matter of Fact with Soledad O'Brien, and is a correspondent for HBO Real Sports. She has anchored shows on CNN, MSNBC, and NBC, and reported for Fox, A&E, Oxygen, Nat Geo, the PBS NewsHour, WebMD, and Al Jazeera America, among others. That is quite a resume. She has over 1.3 million Twitter followers, but most importantly, with her husband, she is the founder of the Powerful, like Pow with her as the second syllable, HER, foundation that helps young women get to and through college. My dear Soledad, thank you for joining us in our MEA community here. Yeah, you were radiant. So let's talk, for your name says a lot, and it helps to tell the story. So Soledad, first of all, your full name, if I'm not mistaken, is Maria de la Soledad Teresa O'Brien. In other words,
yes,
Marchetti O'Brien, the Blessed Virgin Mary of Solitude. That's quite a lot. It's a lot.
Imagine being in 7th grade and having that name. Oh, you're named after the Virgin Mary. That's fun.
Yeah. So tell us, how do you have that name, and what's the mixture of cultures that make up who you are?
Yeah. So interestingly, my dad named me, although it's my mom who was Afro-Cuban. My dad was white. He passed away a couple of years ago, and from Australia. And my parents met because they met in the United States, but both of them were from very devout Catholic families. My dad's twin brother was a priest and 3 of his sisters were nuns. And my mom really ended up living in a convent when she came to the United States from Cuba. So when I was a teenager and I'd say, I just can't believe I don't have permission to do anything. This is so unfair. She'd say, well, listen, if you want to go stay in a convent, I'll let you go. But, you know, they were just very, very devout. In fact, they met in daily mass. So the story, you know, no matter how my parents would tell that story, it always ended in, so if you went to daily mass, you could find a nice boy. But I think religion was very important to them. And so all of my sisters are named after nuns or, you know, or priests in some capacity, or the Virgin Mary, like I was. And you know, I think also my dad loved the Cuban culture. He loved the Spanish language. And so people often think it was my mom who named me. My dad really didn't speak Spanish at all, but he loved the name. And so that's how I became named Maria de la Soledad Teresa Marchetti O'Brien.
Wow. So since religion was a very foundational part of your family, I don't think of you, I don't know you well enough to know, but I don't think of you as someone who's a devoutly religious person. Maybe you are. How has religion or spirituality influenced who you are today?
Such a great question. And nobody ever asked me that. You know, I would consider myself quite a religious person in that I go to mass regularly. All of my kids have been baptized and had their first communion. I got married in the church. I remember my poor husband, who's Episcopalian, and his discovery. Episcopalian weddings are basically 10 minutes long, apparently. Catholic weddings are really long, like, and my uncle said the service. So there was no short. I remember my husband looking over toward me in the middle of our wedding and being like, how long is this going to go? This has been an hour already. I'm like, oh yeah. You're in a full Catholic mass. It's gonna be a minute. But you know, I think I've always felt, and my mom, who was both my parents were very religious, but I thought that they were always very religious in a very service-oriented way. My parents were very devout to Christ, if that makes sense, right? So they were like, so we feed the poor, so we take, you know, we feed the hungry, we support the poor, we believe in helping people, and that was very much their version of Catholicism when I was growing up. And sometimes I feel that a lot of Christian religion kind of loses the Christ part. And so I definitely am sometimes arguing with people, certainly on social media, around like, well, you guys have kind of left the Christ out of this whole thing. I mean, I probably can't cite chapter and verse of the Bible, but I remember very generally kind of what Christ did. And sometimes you don't really see that reflected in those folks who are the most adamant, the most vocal, who really talk a lot about how their religion is important to them, but they don't really seem to be very Christ-like. So I have found that people who don't talk about it a lot, but kind of put their head down and just try to do the work and be good people, sometimes might actually be in reality more religious than those who talk a lot about it.
Was your family politically interested or active? Because of course your Cuban roots could mean that you might have your family might have some conservative leanings, or your mom's side of the family.
Interestingly, a lot of the New Jersey Cubans are pretty liberal, and then I'd say the Miami Cubans, as you know, are pretty conservative. Not really. My mom left Cuba before Castro came into power, and her biggest challenge was that she used to come back into the country. She left when she was 14 years old, and so by the time she then stayed to go to college, you couldn't come back into Cuba and not risk, you know, not being allowed back out again. So in Cuba, her family was not particularly political. And so, and even my family in Cuba, I think a lot of Cubans across the board were very excited about Castro coming, and then very, very quickly dismayed by Castro pretty fast. And then those who could left. And members of my family have been able to leave some of them are balseros. They've hopped in rafts that they've made to get to the United States. So I have some family members who live in New Jersey now, and some who live in Las Vegas. A bunch who live in Miami. So I think, I don't even know how much that they would describe themselves as political, as much as there are just better opportunities in the US. It was always very interesting. You know, Cuba's an interesting place because
it's beautiful. Yeah.
It's such a beautiful country, and the people, I mean, the Cubans love Americans. Like, it's a lot of fun to go to Cuba, even if you have a very small understanding of Spanish, because Cubans are very loving people. And there's some interesting things about Cuba. Cuba has a very high literacy rate. Cuban hospitals, there's so many people that I knew who were incredibly poor and who were incredibly well educated, but great hospitals, but no medicine. My cousin was a lawyer. He now works in a Dunkin' Donuts here in America. But he was a well-regarded lawyer in Cuba. And he's like, I could never afford to go to law school in the United States. Like, where would I get that money? So it's as a country, it's just kind of a bunch of contradictions and messes. But of course, I think under Batista and under Castro, under any dictator, that's just terribly horrible. It's horrible for the people who have to live there and deal with that.
So let's talk about so you grew up in New Jersey, you're a Jersey girl.
No, in Long Island. Oh my God, that means you can't tell by my accent. I put a lot of time and money into losing this accent. NBC, when I started working at NBC, they literally had to send me to Juilliard to a voice coach. And we would do things like news.
Okay, so
to lose my Long Island accent.
Long Island girl.
Oh my God, yes, Chip, talk to me. What do you want? What can I tell you?
Talk about purpose. Like, what was, as you were a teenager, thinking about, what your dream job as you were going to become an adult, and then as in your early adulthood, and then the evolution over time, how has purpose been a sort of a guiding light for you? And how has it evolved as well?
That's such a great question. I don't know that I even thought about purpose when I was younger in high school. I mean, maybe purpose, if you had asked me, would be like, well, do well in school and get to college and get the stuff that you want to do, get the accolades you're going to need to move on to the next thing. I thought I was going to go to medical school. So I did a lot of volunteering. I had a pretty good resume. I worked in a nursing home. I was a certified nurse's assistant, which actually in a land where we were all making $3.35 an hour, that paid $10 an hour. So that was pretty incredible. I worked in a pharmacy. I had a lot of jobs that I thought would help me to get to the career that I thought I wanted. I don't think I really thought about purpose like how grownups think about purpose until I started working. And maybe not even for the first few years, because if you had asked me to be honest about what I was trying to do in my career, I started in a local TV station making about $11,000 a year. And I would have said, like, I just need a job that pays me more. So my goal was just, I need to make more money, and I like this career, and I want to do this next thing over here. And for my first few jobs, that was really the goal. I'm making this and doing this. I'd like to be doing that and making more. Oh, and now I'd like to be doing that and making more. Oh, and I'd like to do that and make more. And then once I became a reporter in local news, I think that's when you begin to really recognize your ability to influence things. And then I think that's when I started thinking very seriously about kind of things that are bigger than yourself. Producers, as I tell people all the time, make the decisions about who's going to be on air and who's not. What's the point of view? When I'm on social media, I talk to people a lot about, like, how's this story framed? Who's getting a voice and who's not getting a voice? Whose version are we hearing? And who do we just not hear from? And there are people who make that decision. They decide who's going to be on and who's not going to get any time at all. And so you begin to realize, like, oh, maybe just by being here, I can kind of expand that a little. I can say, well, maybe a voice we need is this, or have you thought about this perspective? And so I don't think it was until I'd been reporting for a little bit that I began to think about, like, oh, I think part of my purpose as a working journalist could be to stretch it out a little and add things. And as I've gotten older, I think a lot of my purpose, one of the fun things about aging, I think, is that you're so much less afraid, so a lot of the projects we do, we're very, very intentional and adamant about, who's in front of the camera, who are we interviewing, who's the story on, who's behind the camera, who's working here, what are our numbers? If we say we're supporting diversity and we believe in diversity, if you were to walk into my office, would you look at that and say, oh yes, I can see what she's saying is matched by the experience I'm having? And so as I've gotten older, I've just become much more intentional about, like, here's what I expect. And if you don't believe, you don't share my values, then I'm good. We just don't need to work together. And that's been kind of fun because I think when you're younger, you're so much more reluctant to kind of lay it out there. And as you get older, you're like, you know what, we can move this forward or stop in about 5 minutes. Let's just walk through here, what you're going to need and what I'm going to need, and see if we move forward. And that's been, you know, a really fun thing to do, to feel like I have, as part of my purpose, helping young women and men of color who want to be photographers, who want to be producers. They will have an opportunity in my shop to work on big projects that do well, that win awards, and they can move on to other things. That's going to be part of what I will have done. Mentor people, all people, everybody, but make sure that in that everybody is a nice number of people of color who often have a really hard time getting jobs in the work that I'm in. And that's part of my purpose as well, in addition to the kinds of stories that we tell.
Gosh, there's so much I want to unpack there. There's two follow-up questions. I'll start with one and then let you answer, and then I'll ask another one. So when it comes to dealing with corporate media politics, and I don't mean the politics in the sense of, you know, Democratic versus Republican, I just mean the internal politics and the personalities and what people expect of you. And similar to basically what you've just said a moment ago, that as you get older, you say, hey, this is who I am. This is what I believe in. And it's hard for me to stick around here based upon this. You don't have to tell us anything confidential, but maybe tell us a little bit about how it has influenced your career path, in terms of knowing that you have to stay true to your values, or true to wanting to be part of a culture that you feel, you know, proud of.
Yeah, you know, I think it just gets easier. When I worked at CNN, I remember my very first couple of months at CNN, I was sent to go cover the Southeast Asian tsunami. I had just had twins, and which was kind of funny because people were like, I know you're not going to want to leave. And I'm like, I have 4 kids under 4. Nobody wants to leave more than me. Yes, put me on a plane. That sounds amazing. So I get to Thailand, which is where I was stationed, and I meet my producer, and he says to me, I had just been hired by CNN maybe a couple of months before. He said, so I know you're a big deal here, but I want you to know, I know you're a star here at CNN, but I want you to know, if you can't hack it, I will put you on a plane home. And I was like, I mean, doesn't it sound like I was 16? I was like 40 years old. It was so crazy. Like, who speaks that way to a 40-year-old woman? Like, that's bizarre. Yeah. And I was so upset. And I'm a crier. When I get upset, I just start crying. And I remember I called my husband from Thailand, and I'm like, I cannot believe this producer said this. And he gave me great advice. He said, there's nothing you can do. Like, what are you going to do? Call your boss and say, somebody's being mean to me? He's like, just put your head down and execute. And it turned out I was there to do a special report in Thailand, but because Thailand is 12 hours ahead and my morning show started at 6 a.m., I could actually continue to anchor my show. So we would shoot all day. I'd get back around 5 o'clock when the sun was going down a little bit. And then I'd start my morning show at 6 p.m. in Thailand, and we'd wrap it at 10 p.m. in Thailand. And I mean, it was the most horrific story, of course. It was a tsunami. So every day you're reporting on devastation and death. And I mean, it was just horrible. And, and so we just really did a great job. We won awards for our coverage of the special that we did and our reporting. And I always thought that was like really good advice. You kind of have to just suck it up and execute. And the way to prove things to people is just to do it. And I think, as ironically, years later, when I started my production company almost 10 years ago, that producer called me up to ask me for a job. And I was like, so do you remember a conversation we had my very first couple of months at CNN? He said he didn't remember it. But I think now, if that were to happen again, like, I would have probably handled it differently. I'm proud of the way I handled it, but I probably would have said, so let's sit down and talk this out, because I don't appreciate the way you're speaking to me. I'm not 12 years old. I don't need to be put on a plane. I haven't been put on a plane since I was a child. Here's what you should expect from me. Here's what I will expect from you. If you have a problem with that, you are welcome to knock on my door and address it like a grown-up. Okay? Do we understand each other? I would never have done that. That was 20 years ago. But but now I would, right? I'd be like, let's just cut to the chase. I am not afraid. I don't care if you go back and tell everybody I'm difficult. Like I'm 56 years old. I'm good. I've got a name. I've got something I stand for, and I'm just not bothered by you. And it's a really nice position to be in. And that's not infrequent. That happened when I was in my 20s. That happened again when I was in my late 30s, almost 40. So it's not an unusual thing where someone speaks to you in a way that is so dismissive and just demeaning before you've even done anything to deserve it. Like, so yeah, I think navigating those kind of politics is hard. How do you do your job well in an environment where people around you might be giving you a hard time? And I often, when I give advice to young women, and often it's young women of color who ask me, how do I deal with microaggressions? How do I deal, with this person saying this? And I often tell them, like, know it exists, feel it, don't be naive about it. But I thought my husband's advice was good. Put your head down and deliver. Like, that's really the best strategy. Put your head down and deliver. And that's sort of what's always worked for me.
Well, I was going to ask another question, but I want to go dive deeper on this. So being a public face, being a woman of color, and then as you've gotten older, I mean, what's the stack ranking of racism, ageism, and sexism that you've had to deal with? And maybe just tell us a little bit more about it.
It's a good question, but I get asked that a lot, right? I'm telling you, the number of times I've been to a college and a young woman, it's always a woman, always a girl, usually a Black girl, will stand up and say, I'm just trying to, how do you deal with microaggressions? How do you deal? And I have just found that, first I tell a story. So when I worked at WBZ TV in Boston, I used to do the morning show that came on before the Today Show. And so as soon as the show would end, I would take off my headphones, I would run to the bathroom, and then I'd run to the morning meeting. So I always got to the morning meeting at like 7:05. The Today Show started at 7:00. And there was a guy in the morning meeting. His name was John, and he would always make jokes about me. Oh, look who's running on colored people's time. Oh, I mean, literally, I came from the control room, right? Isn't that like the most meanest? Anyway.
Welcome to Boston. Welcome to Boston.
Every day he did this. And I would literally, this was my first job in TV. I was probably 22. And I would go home and strategize. So when he says this, I'm going to do that. So if he says this, then I'm going to say this. Sometimes I'd complain and people would be like, oh my God, you're so sensitive. Sometimes I'd say to him like, oh yeah, John, that's funny. And, it wouldn't really land. I tried like different ways, just could never kind of, I couldn't get it to stop bothering me, and I couldn't fix it. It wouldn't stop. And so I tell this story to college students because after that job, I moved from that job, which I love, to going to NBC News. I've been in TV news for 35 years. I've never seen John again. And I'm like, what a waste of my time. What a waste of my time. I could have been coming up with stories and pitches and doing interesting things while I'm sitting in my bedroom trying to come up with comebacks to a guy who's clearly an idiot, right? Like, and I tell them, don't waste your time. Be aware. Yes, is it misogynistic? Sure. Is it racist? Yeah, kinda. Is it just obnoxious? Yes. So do you really want to waste your time on that? Do you want to sit as I did and spend hours coming up with snappy comebacks that never land anyway? No. Spend that time getting to know an important producer. Spend that time forwarding your career, volunteering to be on an interesting shoot. Like that is a much better use of your time. So know that it exists. Yes, exists, but also not necessarily going to get in your way. You're not naive. You see it, you hear it. When that person says something, you're like, yeah, I see you, John. I see what you're doing. But I wish that I had actually used that time more effectively and more for me, as opposed to dealing with him. You get sucked into these things. And so that's what I would say. Like, yes, all those things exist, but, I just try to, sometimes they're good stories to hang on to and remember, but you got to kind of move through them or you'll lose your mind and you'll spend all your energy, being mad, which is just a miserable place to be.
Yep. Well, let's talk about the powerful foundation, because I know how purposeful you feel about this. And so tell us a little bit about how you started it, what it's doing, and what the results are so far.
Yeah, it's been amazing. So we started, we called it the Starfish Foundation when we started. We started right after Hurricane Katrina because I was meeting all these young women who were trying to kind of move their lives forward post Katrina, and they'd say, "I need $6,285 to go to college," and I was like, "Well, that sounds kind of reasonable. Like, I probably have 6 friends, and we could kind of make that happen, right? Like, that's not $1 million." And so we started kind of like gathering funds to help individual young people who were trying to get off to college. And we were able to send a bunch. But then you realize pretty quickly that the money is important. It's very essential. But you actually also, they need support. You know, for a lot of young people, they need, it's the first in their family to go to college, you know, so they have this sense of at every turn, I don't belong here. We used to have scholars who would say, you know, I've failed statistics. And I'm like, you know, everybody fails statistics. It's okay. Take it again. You know, like when I do badly in a class, I didn't have an existential, do I even belong here? I was like, oh gosh, I probably should take this. I should probably take organic chemistry over the summer. You know, I probably can get a better grade. And so for our scholars, really helping them recognize that like, you can have little setbacks and you can learn. Being smart is not what you're just born with, right? Being smart is, did you study? Did you learn? Did you take it again? Did you figure out your weaknesses? And so that was a really remarkable thing to see young women both funded, but also given a lot of guidance. And now a lot of our scholars are in their 20s and 30s and they have kids. I mean, it's just been incredible. We had one young woman, one Thanksgiving, she came to my house and we were sitting on my porch and it was snowing, so it was freezing. And she said to me, you know, I know you say that you see, you know, things in me, but could you just tell me what they are? Could you just let me know what you see? Because I really need to know specifically. And I think a lot of young people, especially young women of color, and especially women in poverty, they would sometimes tell me, well, I know that, you know, the reason you picked me for this foundation is I have a very sad story. And I would say, I just came back from a tsunami where, or an earthquake where women were giving birth in trees. So that your story is not actually all that sad. The reason you've been picked for this foundation is because you're amazing. I look at you and I see you going places. I just want to, you know, hitch onto that. Like wherever you're going, I'm going. And I've tried very hard to help these young women think of themselves as, you know, asset framed, right? Like, here's the list of amazing things about you. If you ask me about my scholars, I'd tick off, oh my God, she's funny and she's smart and she's hardworking and she's really a person you can rely on. Often in journalism, we deficit frame people, right? Oh, she grew up in the ghetto and her mom had this problem and her dad was an alcoholic and it's such a sad story. And so I've tried very hard in my journalism, and I've sort of, because I can force people around me to also like asset frame people, tell the story of who they are and the potential of who they are, not necessarily this, who wants to be a list of every, you know, terrible thing that's happened in their life. And I think those things are important if you're reporting to get to, but it's not who you are, right? I'm not a list of all my terrible traits. And so, you know, I think helping our young scholars, and they're not so young now, like you are made up of a lot of great assets. Let's lean in on the assets and let's try to, you know, fix some of the deficits. And some deficits just have to be rolled over. You know, if you had a parent who was an alcoholic, well, you're just going to have to get past that and move on in your life. And so it's been a really wonderful thing to be part of. We've had now 30 some odd graduates, and we have a PhD and some law students. And I mean, it's been great. It's been really great. But I thought, like at once they graduated, it'd be like, and congratulations, you've graduated.
Oh no.
I got one of my scholars is living in my apartment in Harlem right now.
Oh wow.
Because she just got a great job in New York City, and New York City rent is expensive. And so she's trying to figure out the roommate thing so she can get a place down in Brooklyn. But it's funny because I really did. I thought like you help them and then they, you know, you send them off. And of course, that's not how it works at all.
Well, yes, the parent thing, we know.
Yes.
There's an era that we now call emerging adulthood. It used to be you're an adult at 18. Now we call it emerging adulthood till 30.
Yeah.
And for good reason. It's hard to get your footing in the world today, harder than it used to be. So you've been a mentor. Oh, did I just lose my power?
I hear you.
Okay.
We
Well,
still got you.
okay, good. So you've been a mentor. We like to say that one way of being a mentor is being a confidant. But we like to define it as the one who gives you confidence. So talk for a moment, maybe about what have you learned from these young, because you're also, we like to say you're a mentor as well. You're a mentor and an intern at the same time. I was a mentor with Brian Chesky, who I was mentoring. I was the in-house mentor at Airbnb, and I was mentoring him, but I was also learning from him. So maybe what is it that you learn from these young people, and what is the future of intergenerational collaboration at work?
Oh my gosh, it's amazing. Well, first of all, intergeneral collaboration is basically the relationship I have with my children, because as I climb into an Uber every single time, they say to me, Charles? And I say, Charles's mom. Charles set up my Uber. And they're like, oh, I get it. We get a lot of those. I think intergenerational collaboration is amazing and important, and especially in my business, right? You really need people who are going to come at stories from different ways, who are going to see things differently, who are going to challenge those things that, that we've sort of mythologized, like, oh, and this is always true. And at the same time, one of my scholars was saying the other day, right before she started this new job, she said, I said, well, what are you worried about? What are you afraid of? And she said, well, I'm afraid I'm going to live in a New York City apartment that doesn't match the pictures. I'm like, oh yeah, definitely. Yes. and I think it might have bugs. I'm like,
let's manage your expectations on that.
Exactly. I'm like, I can help you right away. Yes, you're definitely going to have bugs. It's New York City. What was her other thing? It's going to be very small. I'm like, oh my goodness. Yes. Terrible. It's going to be your first apartment. The good news is you're going to literally tell stories about it forever. But she said, I'm also worried that I'm going to have imposter syndrome. I feel like I have imposter syndrome. I'm like, but I said to her, this might be a controversial thing. I don't believe in imposter syndrome. I said to her, you haven't started the job yet. You can't be an imposter. You don't even know what you're doing. Like, stop glomming onto a thing. You're not an imposter. You literally have an entry-level job, which is designed to help you learn. So you're not an imposter. An imposter is someone who pretends to be a thing that they're not. You're not pretending. You're walking in saying, hey, I'm excited to be here. I don't really know anything. Can somebody help me? And so I've tried to help her knock down this idea of, like, don't be afraid to ask questions. I don't think people are imposters. I think they just don't know something yet. And I worry when we frame it as imposter syndrome, we send people scurrying to hide, as opposed to being like, yeah, hey, I'm new and I don't know it yet. So who's the person who can teach me that? I don't like hiding behind a label that I don't think is, I can tell you the number of young women who are like, I'm an imposter. I'm like, you are unemployed. You're not an imposter yet because you don't have a job. You can't be an imposter in a job you do not have. They're just young and new, and they are learning. And I'd rather call it that than put the weight on them that somehow they're faking it when they're not.
Beautiful. So in about 3 minutes, we're going to open up for questions. So for those of you who are listening in, if you want to go ahead and raise your hand, there's a raise hand function at the bottom. We can take people in the queue. But let me ask two last questions. First one would be, what do you think you're wiser? We're a midlife wisdom school. That's what MEA is. We're very proud of having, by the end of this quarter, by the end of the year, we'll have almost 3,000 alumni from 40 countries. And over half of the people who've come and done workshops here in Baja have been on some form of financial aid that we've given them. Average age is 54, 63 or 64% of them are women. 20 to 25% of people of color, which is unusual for a retreat center. Long story short is we focus on wisdom. How do we cultivate and harvest our wisdom? What do you think you're more wise at in life? One thing I heard you say earlier was the idea that you don't put up with, you have what we call environmental mastery. You know what habitats you're going to flourish in, and you don't wait around and be patient if you're in a habitat that is not going to allow you to flourish. Beyond that, what else have you gotten wiser about as you've gotten older?
This is going to sound contradictory, but the flip side of that is also listening to other people, like really listening to their feedback. I have a terrible habit, and my daughter has told me a million times, where I'll walk into the house and say to the boys, hey, guys, I need you to do me a favor. Can you help me bring the garbage out? Hey, can you guys do, it's 11 o'clock in the morning. They've just woken up. I've been up since 5:30. I've been running through the day. And my daughter's like, Mom, start with good morning. Start with, how was your night? And, I'm literally on my third list of getting stuff done and my fifth cup of coffee. And I think I've gotten much better at listening to feedback. So on one hand, yes, you have to say, I know this environment is good for me, but you also have to listen to the people who are like, also, this environment might be good for you and it won't kill you to step into it and try this thing, and I always have appreciated the people who take the time to help you get better, because they don't have to, right? They could just let you, when I was in Thailand, for example, I would do a story on, I was doing a story on some of the families that were just left utterly homeless by this tsunami. And there were so many little kids, and I had little kids about the same size, 6, 7, and I would rest my hand on like someone's head, kind of like just in a nice way. And finally, one of the volunteers took me aside and said, in this culture, it is so disrespectful to touch a child on the head. I had no idea. And that person was putting themselves in a fair amount of jeopardy, right? Like, I'm here to do a story. And so if I get mad, nothing to say that I'm not going to be like, and I'm out, good luck. And I just remember being so grateful, like, oh my God, I'm so embarrassed. Like I was not my intention. And I thought, like, good for that person to take me aside, and not in an embarrassing way, but in a very straightforward way. Like, this is not cool and you need to stop doing it. And I do think it often comes from people who are a generation below you, who are not afraid of you, even regardless of what the hierarchy, right? They're just like, I'm going to speak to you as a person and give you some advice. And sometimes I think we do the same thing to people who are generationally younger than us. We go in and say, I'm watching your interaction in this meeting, and I don't think you want to come across this way. Let me help you to navigate the next step of your career. So it can definitely go both ways. But I think I've gotten wiser because I've gotten better at just listening to that feedback and not being like, oh no, you have to understand, those boys have been sleeping in and I need someone to take the garbage. Being like, you're right. What an unpleasant way to wake up. You wake up, you roll out of bed, even if it's at 11 a.m. and someone's first thought is, make sure you get the garbage, and not, hey, good morning, I'm happy to see you. So I thought it was really good advice. And I try to put those things into action and not spend time being offended or hurt that someone pointed that out.
Yeah, I think a couple thoughts there. One is, I think after age 50, you stop taking things quite so personally. Secondly, and hopefully before then, we like to quote something that's attributed to Viktor Frankl from Man's Search for Meaning, which is, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is your power to choose your response. And in your response lies your growth and your freedom. Because as we get older, hopefully we are less emotionally reactive. We know how to create that space, which is both healthy for us and everybody else around us.
In my business, you need a lot of, you need a lot of feedback. And, and there were definitely, the reality is some days, you've messed up, right? It was a bad show. It was a terrible interview. So I would say, I do want to talk about it, but let's not do it today. Let's do it tomorrow. And I thought, but I was very good at getting feedback, and it made me much better at my job, because I would really analyze, where did I lose the thread of the interview? This was good. This was good. Oh my gosh. Here's where they said they did a thing and I completely missed it. And you get so much better when you go back and you analyze, and you have to have a certain amount of humility and willing to look at something that you messed up in order to get better.
Last question, and then I see no hands going up right now, so for those, this is the chance to ask Soledad a question. Come on, I can't believe you guys haven't raised your hand yet, but let's there we go. Thank you to Maureen. So Soledad, last question. We have an online course, 8-week online course that starts a week and a half from now called Living and Working on Purpose. And it's really good. I mean, Carrie, who started she is the MC today. She's so good at crafting these things. We have over 30 wonderful people from all over, famous people talking about purpose. If you had 3 or 4 minutes to just talk about the subject of purpose and what it means to you today, or maybe even a role model of somebody who's been purposeful in your life, what does that word mean to you today? It means a lot more to you today than it did when you were a teenager. So
For sure.
what does the word purpose mean?
Yeah. I remember Gwen Ifill many years ago telling me, when you finally get into those rooms, like you have to use it, like you're sitting here fighting your way into these specialized rooms, right? The network anchor slot, there's not very many of them. There's 15 of them or something, not very many. And so then once you're in there, you have a couple of choices. You can sit there and coast, or you can say, now that I'm here, I have to kind of bring along those things that I need people to know. I have to kind of crack the doors open a little bit more and make sure that if I'm going to be allowed in this space, that I'm going to bring some stuff with me. And so for me, that has really been my purpose. I'm going to say, here's the kind of stories I want to do. I'm going to push back and make sure the pitches that I do are really good so that they get approved. I'm going to make sure that they win so that they get funded the next year, right? It's very easy to say it's Black History Month. We're going to do this story. Don't we all feel good? Kumbaya, everybody. Let's never do it again. As opposed to, no, we're going to do this and it's going to be great and we're going to win. And because winning is going to help us on a lot of different fronts, we're going to show you that this content is actually important. So I think a lot of my purpose has been around content that reflects a lot of different communities, and that those stories can be told in really great ways, and then making sure that we have rooms full of people who can tell those stories, and sometimes calling out those people, things that are not going well, is like, we have to do better. We can't just deliver a C. It's just not okay. These stories are too important. When we started doing Black in America, which was a doc I did for CNN, I remember people would stop me in the air. Like, it was such a big deal because you realize like it hadn't really happened before, and just like it really mattered. And our first Latino in America, we were sitting in this big room and we got in this debate about were Puerto Ricans Americans, which, by the way, you can Google that. Yes, in fact, they are. And I remember being like, wow, this is the wrong team to do this. And I literally walked up the stairs. We had this big internal spiral staircase. And I talked to the president of CNN, and we killed the project and we started it over again, because I thought like what they're creating is not good. And I'm not like, we just can't do it. Like, I'm not going to sit here and create the very rare documentary called Latino in America, and it's going to be bad. Just not going to do it. So for me, purpose is sometimes that awkward, uncomfortable feeling of standing up for the right thing and making sure that you're holding people accountable, and you being there matters, I guess, is probably the best definition that I have, that, you were there and it mattered that you were there. And then I think when you look at it that way, it's like, yes, then that was worth it. It was worth it to not be around my family sometimes. It was worth it to travel. It was worth it to work crazy hours, because me being there actually mattered.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you. Let's go to Maureen. Thank you for your patience, Maureen. I think you actually asked a question in the chat earlier. If you can ask that one if you want. Or
actually, that's the burning one. That's the burning one for me. Can you guys hear me? Hopefully.
Yes.
I can hear you, Maureen. Hi.
Good. Hi, Soledad. Nice to meet you.
Great to meet you. I don't have my glasses on, so I cannot read your, this is like 8 font on my laptop. So I literally have no idea what your question says.
No problem at all. So my question is, at what point in your career and at which age did you start to notice ageism in the media industry, and how, if at all, did that shape the career choices that you made to chart your course to where you are today?
Such a great question. I don't know that there was a moment of it. It's just, I guess when I was a new reporter in a local station in San Francisco, so that would have been 96-ish, 1996. One day, they moved everybody around. So San Francisco has a giant coverage area, right? We have San Francisco, and then we have San Jose, and then you have Oakland, right? Like that's a massive coverage area. And one day, a bunch of the people who lived in San Jose were told that they had to start reporting to San Francisco. And you're like, someone just added 90 minutes each way to your commute from yesterday. Like it was crazy. And I remember thinking like, there was just a sense that, you know, women of a certain age just weren't valuable, right? Like they just, I mean, I had a news director once tell me when I asked him, like, so how do you pick the people who are on air? He literally told me, I'll clean it up a little bit for the audience, but he literally said, if he found people attractive, that's, you know, he, you know, and you could tell who he found attractive. And so I think all of those things made me realize that what I needed was some self-determination, you know, and also having kids. If you're an anchor woman and you have a baby, everyone thinks that's the greatest thing ever, you know, and they do a little story on you. And, you know, if you're a producer, nobody likes that, right? Because you're going to miss work and it's not cute and nobody wants to hear about your baby and no one's sending you a present. And so you begin to realize like, wow, the more leverage I can have, the more I'm going to be able to do the things that I want to do. And so I think I just kind of, you would just see these little moments of things happening. And that helped me really decide to run my own production company where you work more hours, but you don't work on things that you don't believe in. You're not sent, you know, into the field for a week covering a story that you just think is, again, it doesn't matter that I'm here. And so, but there was no one moment where I would say like, oh, that was my aha moment around, you know, recognizing, you know, the ageism and that women were really treated very differently. But listen, when I left my anchor job, you know, I was anchoring a show solo and I was replaced, you know, and then the people who were replacing me said, you know, we really need a young woman and an older guy. That's the model that everybody's comfortable with. And I was like, okay, I mean, what do you do with that? Like, I can't get younger, you know, so, and I can't get blonder and not look weird. So, I think you have two options, right? You can be mad about it, or you can say, okay, what can I carve out for myself that I can do?
Thank you.
Thank you for the great question, Maureen. Let's go to Karen. Great to see you, Karen.
Great to see you, Chip. Thank you. And Soledad, this is amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I love everything you're saying around letting purpose guide you and your values guide you. You work very hard. I saw you working at Dreamforce. I worked for Salesforce. You work very hard. You have very busy days. You probably have very big teams. Have you found yourself in situations where due to the workload or due to a stressful moment, you've not operated within your values or with your purpose? How have you corrected it either in the moment or the next day with your team?
That's such a great question. I don't lose my temper a lot. It's funny because I think if my team were here, they'd be like, actually, we'd like to answer this question for her. But I'm not a yeller. I really hated being yelled at when I started working in TV news. And so I'm not a screamer at all. I don't yell. So I think where I get most disappointed is when I don't live up to the commitments that I've agreed to do, that I'm not paying attention. I'm on my phone at a kid's recital, right? Because I've agreed to get this thing done and I'm going to have to be on the phone working on it. And so I can turn it in at the same time that they are playing green sleeves on the flute, and it's so I often feel like, I don't want to be the multitasker. I don't want to be that person. And I've tried to build in with the people around me, with my staff, a lot of like, I need you to say to me, right? No, I'm going to push back less. We're saying no to that. We're not doing this. I was having a conversation with one of my employees who I've worked with for literally 20 years. She's great, but she's a hard worker and she'll work a 15-hour day and tell me, oh my gosh, I'm just in bad shape. And I'm like, go to yoga. Like I insist you absolutely in the middle of the day, every single person on my team can say, you know what? I am going to the gym. I am going to a yoga class. Like I don't want to be that person. Like, I hate when I sit home all day at work and I don't get out of the house. So I'm not going to be responsible for other people. So I'm not really bad on that with my team. I think I'm bad on it with myself. I double book. I don't, I try to get things done and I can't get them done.
Welcome to Zoom.
That's
Enter
probably
your
my
meeting
biggest,
ID
that's
followed
probably
by
my biggest
pound.
weakness, I would say.
All right. Thank you. And we'll mute that person. Linda Grubbs, let's go to you.
Hi, Chip. Hi, Soledad. Really happy to meet you. You gave me a really good segue into my next question. I am a learning and development specialist specializing in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I work with a lot of organizations where what I call the audio doesn't match the video. And that is, an example would be after George Floyd was murdered, a lot of companies got on the bandwagon of diversity, equity, and inclusion. But in working with some of them, I realized that, that's kind of over. And even though it's in their values, they're not living their values. And it's time to have that awkward conversation. And I'm wondering what your experience is in that area and any tips you can give me.
Yeah, I've had that conversation with some people, and I think two things. One, I think the only person you should be dealing with is the highest ranking person, which is now, I think, post George Floyd. It really did seem like the CEOs were interested in this conversation.
Right.
And so I would go to the CEO, right? I mean, my whole thing, I always say this to people. It starts with the CEO. If the CEO cares, then everybody will care. Everybody understands fully what the CEO cares about, right? And the CEO constantly sends out the messaging like, wink, wink, we don't care, or this is important to me and I expect you to do it. And so I would start with the CEO. Like, is this something, I used to say this to my bosses. I'd say, I am happy to be the face of diversity at this company if it's something we believe in. If you want to say, honestly, Soledad, it's not even in the top 10 things, we're dealing with a bunch of other stuff, I'll be like, I get it. I hear you, totally okay. But then I'm not going to do this event, right? Like, like I won't pretend I'm in, but if it's not real, then I'm not in. And you can kind of have that conversation, right? Like, I am here to support you, but I need to hear from you, the CEO, that this matters. And by the way, you can tell me it doesn't matter to you. You can say it. Like, you can literally say, I'm going to be honest, not important to me. And we will treat each other. But I hate operating in a thing where people are clearly pretending. And then the other thing that I've seen a lot of is we're starting to get pushback from our white employees.
Yes,
and I'm like,
absolutely.
So here's what I say to that. Fantastic. Let's actually do a spreadsheet of where everybody is from leadership on down in every position. Oh, look at that. 98% of leadership, white men. I think we're feeling pretty good about that. You should go back and tell them they're doing just fine, right? Like data. Because
Right.
I started getting that as well. We're getting uncomfortable. A lot of the white men are feeling uncomfortable with this whole diversity thing. There's so much data now around that diversifying organizations adds tremendous value. Literally print out those reports and just say, here's one, here's another one, here's another one. There's real added value. But if you're just doing this for show, I'm not a show pony. Like, I'm happy to help, but also I'm happy to step back and not help if that's, if it's not coming from you, the CEO. And I think, then you end up having people, or at least having a real conversation with you, as opposed to a fake conversation.
Thank you for that part about just being authentic, saying, let me know if this is not important to you. And it's okay to say that. I don't think I've given space for that. So thank you. I appreciate it.
You bet.
Thanks, Linda. Stephen, try to keep a brief question, because I want to make sure we try to get to.
I talked too long. Sorry.
No. It's fine. That you're enthusiastic.
No, my question is pretty direct. Thank you so much, both Chip and Soledad. I work with a lot of creative types, men and women. I'm in the architecture business, and I see their incredible talent, and yet I also see them very tentative and sometimes filled with self-doubt. I wonder if you've experienced that in the glass ceilings you've had to break, and what you might say to those people. I'm a manager. I want to encourage them, but I want to feel their insecurity or their self-doubt, but I want to give them good advice. I just wonder if you could help.
Yeah, I think if they're talented, I've always loved just understanding, like, because for some people, there's a certain part of it that they're uncomfortable with. They're comfortable in their talent, right? They feel good about their talent, but when it comes to presenting it out loud, or when it comes to putting a price tag on it, or when it comes to, actually delivering it, and someone's pushing back on it, those are the things that start falling apart. So I like really digging into, so-and-so is great at this, and they're not great at this part. It's why I have an agent. I don't like to discuss money, right? I literally say, oh my God, I would work for free. But whoo, my agent, she is so picky. And I'm going to send you off to her, and she's going to do the negotiation. Really pleasant, because you know what? I realized that's a weakness in me. I don't enjoy it. I don't want to do it. And I think you can support your team by doing a similar thing. You're amazing at this. What part can I help with? Am I in there with you when you feel like we have to price it, or when you feel like you're now taking feedback and that person might crumble when someone starts pushing back on their creative suggestions, and you could be the blocker while protecting the artist, right? Like, you're great. Yes. And maybe there might be something in there where they want to grow, right? They might say, actually, I really would like to get good at figuring out the pricing. I'm making this up, obviously. Or I would like to be in those meetings where I can push back and tell the client why their idea of putting a 3-car garage over, the swimming pool is a bad idea. Mm-hmm. So I think that people often want to grow. They just feel like they don't know how to do it yet. And you can help them grow and also protect them. Like, I get it. You don't want to negotiate. I'm going to help you do that. I'm going to sit in the meeting. You're going to sit there and nod. And I'm going to say, here's what actually we need to do next. And you can speak for them.
Thank you. It really reinforces what I say. We're all one team, and we don't want to put square pegs in round holes. And that's why we can support each other. So thank you so much.
I used to work on a show where the belief was that everybody could do everything. And so we had this giant jib, and the opening shot, the show was called The Site. And I was the anchor, and I'd say, good evening and welcome to the site. But they believed anybody could drive the jib. The jib is massive. The jib is 60 feet long. And there are so many outtakes of me saying, good evening, welcome to the site, because whoever was driving the jib was new, and they would crash into things. Not everybody can drive the jib, right? Everybody has a job, they do well, and figure out what you do well, and then find the guy who loves drive, or the girl who loves driving the jib, and let them drive the jib because they do it well. And it's not for everybody.
Got it. Claudia, brief question.
Hey, Chip. Hi, Soledad.
Hi.
Quick question for you. By the way, I put the video on just for the two of you. Soledad, I've got to ask you a 2-part question. How did you get to the top and kept yourself at the top? And at a particular company, does a certain look, is it required to have a certain look as a reporter and being on screen?
So I think short answer is I got to the top because I was very intentional about making sure everything I touched was very good or great. And that meant sometimes making enemies, and that meant taking a lot of the blame. Like, I assumed it's my fault. I was like, everything, if this is not good, it's my fault, and so it really, you would literally go back and do it again and do it again. No, it's not okay. Do it again. Sometimes that makes you enemies. People don't always love that. But I think this idea of I'm responsible for the quality control helped me a lot. And yeah, I mean, at one point I was in a doc called Light Girls, which was about colorism. And I remember talking to the interviewer and saying, like, why do you think so many of the anchors kind of in the 90s, Suzanne Malveaux, Frederica Whitfield, right? Like, we all could be sisters. I wonder why, right? Like, because there's a type that is what I like to call the person who is ethnic, ambiguously ethnic, and everybody's like, yes, they count, but they're not going to scare anybody. I mean, clearly. And I think we've seen that grow a little bit, but not tremendously, but a little bit. So yeah, I'm a big fan of like talking about that honestly and overtly. I think the type is growing, but there's no question there was a type. Absolutely. And I think still continues to be.
I'm afraid we're running out of time. Do you have 5 more minutes?
Yes,
do you have to go? Okay, so we're going to go lightning round. You're going to have one sentence, and Soledad, you're going to try to answer it within a paragraph.
Yes.
Let's go to Marnie.
Who do you surround yourself to give you open and honest feedback?
Beautiful.
Teenagers are the worst and the best, but the worst. And I have a really good group of friends. I really think when you curate your friends who can say, girl, you know I love you, but you're in good shape.
Love it. Thank you.
Marcia, you are going to wrap us up.
Thank you. It's Marcia. I just want to thank Soledad.
I had this intuition that it was Marcia. My fault.
It's all
Marcia.
good. It's not good, but it's good for today. Soledad, I just like to thank you so much for bringing up colorism and ageism. Soledad, I'm very passionate about ageism because I'm 60 and I already know the ageism thing is real. So thank you so much.
You bet. You bet.
What a nice way to end. Soledad, just thank you. Thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for your curiosity, your generosity, your playfulness, and your audaciousness. Those are our 5 core values for MEA. And I think they describe you very well.
Thank you for having me. What a pleasure.
So, and Carrie, thank you for serving this up. Carrie put in the notes the online purpose course, Living and Working on Purpose, which starts a week from this Saturday.
Can I add one thing, Chip? I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I wanted to say we just finished a doc on Rosa Parks, and holy cow, if you want to learn about a woman who had incredible purpose in the face of a lot of adversity, it's going to stream on Peacock starting October 19th. And it is really worth it. It's our latest doc, and it's called The Rebellious Life of Mrs. Rosa Parks. So I hope you guys, because you're talking about purpose, I hope you get a chance to take a look at that.
Beautiful. And she also is a woman who, as she aged, had Alzheimer's, if I'm not mistaken. And so it is one of those good examples of like how, if we're going to live longer, how are we going to address Alzheimer's as an illness of older people. So thank you so much, Soledad. So thanks to everybody for coming. Thank you for
Soledad. Thank you, Chip. Thank you
in Japan.
To everyone. And you can see this on YouTube or on our Facebook or LinkedIn. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Soledad. Thank you, Chip.
Thank you. Bye, guys.
All right. Bye.